in. All right, so we're going to do our Django review. We're going to use the Django auth exercise. I believe that's from yesterday. And we're going to build out a full Django app. I've done like the bare minimum of I've created a Django project, which I named backend just to be boring. But we don't have any apps. I haven't installed any dependencies. So we're really starting from scratch and we're going to build it out. This sources directory just holds that screenshot right there, so we don't have to worry about that. And what I'm going to do is, like, we have most of the instructions here in the README. I'm just gonna make some room, and this is going to be like, you know, our tasks to-do list where we can write this stuff down as we go. To do a quick review of what this project looks like, we need to build a to-do list app. We're going to have to create 4 models. We're going to have a user and user accounts or authentication. So obviously, as a user, I can only add lists and to-do items for my to-do list. And then a list can have tasks, and then a task can have subtasks, which hopefully we should be able to get to in time. And to kind of start the sort of review session off, and kind of run down the questions list, Mikhail, can you maybe walk us through like what kind of relationships are we looking at between these different parts, these different models? Like one-to-one, one-to-many, what's the relationship between user and list?
That a one-to-many?
Yeah, I would agree. It's a one-to-many relationship, right? One user can have many lists. Each list only belongs to one user. And Mikhail, what about between a list and a task?
One list can have many tasks as well.
Yeah, exactly. And task and subtask.
Yep, one task can have many subtasks.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And so we've got a whole lot of one-to-many. And Mikhail, can you remind me, like, what Django model field do I use for one-to-many relationships?
A Django model build?
Like, there's that one-to-one field, there's the many-to-many field, models dot.
Daniel, help me out with that.
You might be muted, Daniel.
Sorry, I believe there is a many-to-many fields. And
There is, but we've mostly been using just the field name of foreign key field, right? Does this ring a bell to folks? Yeah, there is a many-to-many field. There might even be a field named many-to-one or one-to-many. There's a subtle difference, but foreign key does the same thing. We can use this for one-to-many, aka many to one, right? And as long as we're talking through our models, it might actually be useful to start building this out, because this is actually going to be the core of our application. Now, I haven't installed Django REST framework. I haven't done any of that stuff. So let's kind of knock that stuff out before we dive into this too much, right? Because over here we have our data model that we're going to have to build, but we still have some setup to do. We're going to have to install dependencies. I'm going to have to, you know, tweak settings.py. I'm probably going to have to create some Django apps. And I feel like there's a setup step here that I'm missing. Brandon Neslage, it's not quite a trick question, but there's one really big setup step here for a new Django project that I'm missing. And it involves data.
It involves data.
Yeah,
Um, as far as setup, I'm not really sure. I know that after the data models are created, we would need to migrate the changes, but I don't know what you mean by data.
yeah. What about like before setup? Like I have a brand new project right now. I haven't touched anything in
Oh,
settings.py.
we need to organize our PostgreSQL settings.
Yeah, exactly. And we need to create the database as well. And I realize it's a little bit of that was a little bit of an unfair question because I was kind of jumping from like a later step to an earlier step. But this is the stuff that we need to do, right? And it'd be really nice to get this stuff done. And in fact, we should just do our auth setup stuff without we don't have to worry too much. Well, auth, maybe we'll do that later because it needs a separate model, right? So maybe models for lists and tasks. That can be one thing that we do. And after that, maybe we should, create users, set up auth. And Brandon, what dependencies like am I gonna have to install? Not like the full-on names, but for a brand new Django project that's going to talk to Postgres and use Django REST framework, what do we need?
We will need psycho-PG binaries. We
Yep.
will need REST API frameworks.
Yep. Love it. And I think that might be it. If we were talking to a third-party API, we'd need the requests library, right? But I'm not sure if we need that right now. And Brandon, how just kind of looking at the things we need to build here, right? We need lists, we need tasks, we need subtasks, we need users and authentication. What's your first thought as to like some Django apps that we want to create to organize stuff?
User app, list app, task app, subtask app.
Yeah, love it. List app, task app, subtask app. Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head there. And Brandon, thank you, man. And this is probably a pretty good list of things we need to do. Joseph, do you maybe want to remind me, like, what are some things we know we need to change in settings.py when we're setting up this project?
We have to add Django to speak to our database, so we have to forget where it is, but we have to change route light to Postgres and then put our database in place of what was there.
Yeah, exactly. We got to set the database name in settings.py in that one spot that we'll see in a minute. FYI, your mic is it's got a little bit of the robot voice. No worries. We're gonna have to add the apps to install apps. And in fact, we probably need to do this for Django REST framework as well. That's sort of ringing a bell for me too. Now the authentication stuff we'll have to do more, settings, PY tweaks, but we can cross that bridge when we get there. This is a pretty good start, right? And I wanted to do this because if you front load your design work and like writing out your to-do list and your plan of attack, then implementation becomes so much easier. So I'm just gonna dive through this and knock this stuff out of the way so we can get to the good stuff of making some models for our data model. And the goal here is we're gonna get just the absolute minimum for each of these models, right? Right now I just create the models, create the relationships. That's all I care about. I'm not going to worry too much about fields. So let's install some dependencies. I'm going to use Control R on the command line because I don't remember. There we go. That looks like the psycho-PG binary dependency that I want. So let's go ahead and install that. Let's go ahead and install Django REST framework. Is that the full name? That did seem to install successfully. So I think our dependencies are taken care of. Let's go update settings.py here in installed apps. And I definitely have guide code for this. I'm not doing all of this off the top of my head, and I'm going to make sure I get these names right. And so we've got REST framework. And in fact, I know we're going to need something from Django REST framework for authentication. And I'm just going to add that now. REST framework dot auth token, right? As long as we're adding REST framework stuff, we might as well add this.
There's a typo.
Oh, thank you so much, Erica. All right. And let's go ahead and let's make our Django apps. And like Brandon was saying, I want user app, list app, task app, subtask app. And let's go ahead and just add all of these now to install apps. And I haven't run any migrations yet. You know, I kind of remember that the very first time I run Django, it does some migrations, right? For like Django admin and authentication and stuff like that. And actually, I'm remembering that, you know, yesterday we had to like drop and rebuild our database because when we add the auth stuff, it added extra steps. And I'd like maybe to get the auth stuff out of the way. So I think we actually should be fine if we can just do manage PY, make migrations. Oh, and I have to create my database. That would help, wouldn't it? So let me go ahead and open up a new terminal and connect to Postgres. And let me see what databases I have. So I don't make a database name that already exists. I have a ton of to-do lists. So let's just, I'm going to drop ToDoDB, and that's going to be our database name. And now over here, we update the engine to be Postgres, to use Postgres instead of SQLite. And the name is just going to be todo_db. And now at this point, I think I have the absolute minimum I need in order to create those initial migrations. Not sure what that red triangle is for. Create those initial migrations and just run my server just to make sure I don't have any typos. So I doubt there are any migrations that need to be made. But there definitely are migrations that need to be applied because Django has a bunch of setup stuff, right? And all this authentication stuff. And we're going to have to drop and rebuild the database when we get to authentication in a little bit, but that's okay. And let's run the server. Again, this is just a sanity check. I want to make sure I don't have any typos. And let's pull this over here because we're going to be using this a lot. And Django is working. Mikhail, yes, sir.
What's the command after you create the database? What's the next step after you do that?
Oh yeah, so after creating the database, so I just always run the make migration command before I run migrate as a sanity check to make sure I haven't forgotten to. And because 99% of the time, there's no downside to doing it. Right? If no migrations need to be created, none will be created. If some do need to be created, it's probably good for me to find that out. Once those migrations are created, I run migrate to actually apply those migrations to the database to actually create all the SQL tables and stuff. And when you have a brand new Django project, Django admin, Django auth, all of those already installed apps already have a bunch of migrations that need to be applied. Like if we connect to our to-do database here, you know, that's what that Python managed.py migrate command that I ran a moment ago did.
So do you have to go into SQL and create the database there before you update it in the settings.py?
You can change it in settings.py whenever you want, but if you try to apply migrations to a database that doesn't exist, that's just going to fail, right? So having the database created before you run the migrate command is critical.
Okay, thank
For
you.
sure. And Postgres, I think, installed on the command line for everyone, some command line programs, CreateDB, DropDB. They do the exact same thing of doing those same commands in SQL, just like I did a minute ago. So it's really dealer's choice which way you want to do that. And actually, this is probably a good point just to pause and check in and see if folks have any questions. Okay, awesome. And actually, before we get too deep into the review session, are there things in particular that people want to make sure we cover and spend time on today? Like models, serializers, paths, what in particular do people really want to see and hit? Len, yes, sir.
For me, it's really just about crushing the app soup to nuts. Like there isn't,
Got it.
it's more of a full demo just to understand, to tie it all together, because everything's been done individually. That's me.
Got it. Totally. We're definitely gonna do that. Brandon, yes, sir.
I'd like to see CRUD and creation of data with like associations, like foreign keys and many, or I think we only have foreign keys in this, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we only have one-to-many relationships for this one. We don't have any many-to-many relationships. Earl John, yes, sir.
Same thing with Brandon. I want to see like more with like relationships and with like foreign keys and stuff, and also like the related name.
Yeah, so that sounds good, and we'll definitely do some related name stuff. Daniel, yes, sir.
I'm not sure if you're gonna interact with a third API. Are you gonna be using the noun project?
We are not going to interact with a third API for this review. If there's time, we can look at the noun project, but I don't think we'll have time.
Copy, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And hold on one moment. I'm double checking. I am pretty sure like 90, like pretty darn sure you don't have to interact with a third-party API for the assessment. If there's time, I'd love to go over it though, because I agree it's a good one to see. All right, let's keep on rolling. So we've done a lot of setup. There's actually a little more setup I can do, right? Before even doing any of this other work, I can set up URLs.py, right? Because we know we're going to have routes. Like, and in fact, the app tells us all the different routes that we need to have. If I should probably get rid of all of this crazy amount of space that I have. Or actually, we can just pull it up here. This is a way better way to look at it. We know that we're going to have to build all this plus stuff for users. So I might as well do the basic pathing to hook this up to the URLs.py in my apps now, right? Because I know I'm going to need it. I don't have URLs.py files in any of these apps, so I might as well make those now as well. So I'm just going to do touch, let's do user app URLs.py. to create that file, touch list app urls.py, touch task app urls.py, touch subtask app urls.py. All right, and now I have 4 of these urls py files. I honestly always have a terrible time remembering what belongs in them, so I'm just going to copy what's in here and paste them in. Let me close all of these up, and we'll just kind of go on the top down. So for the list app, let's paste this in. We certainly don't want to talk to the admin app. There's nothing here yet. There's nothing real. So I think I'm just gonna kind of leave it like that and comment it out and just use this as my template. Just Django will probably actually still complain about this, but having these files exist with an empty URL patterns makes me feel a lot better than having them not exist. So now we've done that for the task app, and let me go ahead and close these out so we don't get too cluttered up here. And now I think so subtask app has a URLs py, list app has a URLs py, task app has a URLs py, user app URLs py. Right, and the reason I wanted to do that was because now when I go to the main project, which I didn't name this directory very well, and I go into its URLs py, we can add all these paths, right? API / lists, and then I do include the name of the Django app. And I should have named these apps plurally, but it is now too late. So I'm just going to have to live with that mental contradiction. And I include the URLs py module. I also need to import this include function from Django URLs. And that loads that URL patterns here. And the reason I wanted to make those URLs py files first is so that this include statement is working code, right? There might be nothing here, but I'm not referencing something that doesn't exist. And we're going to do the same thing for, actually, I don't know if we need to do it for tasks. Looking at this routing, let's think about that just a moment as long as we're doing this. Because I think everything else will actually get built off of lists. So I may have created a couple files, or I don't need all our URLs py routing for tasks and subtasks might end up in lists, but we can cross that bridge later. But I'm definitely going to need users. So let's go ahead and just set that one up too. Right? So again, easy to do, but making my life easier and keeping my program in a working state. And see, I ran the server. I made a typo because I should have named user app singular, but I named it plural. So again, that's the best way to debug, is have tiny issues. And this is probably expected because these are empty. I think that's what's going on, unless I have an error. And I saw a hand up.
Oh no, that was for the
Oh, okay, awesome.
thanks.
I'm pretty sure that this error is because the URLs py is empty for lists and users. You know, we can test this out. If I comment these out and kill and restart my server, it works just fine, right? And if I bring this one in and kill and restart my server, we get the error. So that's okay for now. I don't want to create those yet. So my app isn't 100% working, but it's close, and I'm building out more of my skeleton. Right? So at some point, you know, we've created our Django apps, we've taken care of all this. This is all done now. We made our database. We've tweaked settings.py. We've done all this. We're gonna have to add routing, right? When we get to these steps after we create our, you know, lists and tasks, we're going to need to add routing, create serializers. You know, in fact, we should just maybe write out all of these steps for us to remember. So we're gonna have, you know, list, make model, serializer, use, routes. And pretty much the same thing for, you know, tasks, subtasks. User, there's a little bit more stuff to do, right, to set up. So at this point, we actually have a little bit of a choice. We can either keep moving like we were talking about before and build out these models and relationships, or we can build out the user model and maybe get that working a bit more. Do folks have a preference about what we want to do next? Len, yes, sir.
Yesterday you said do authentication first, so I feel like building out the user model and getting authentication set up is just based off of your input from yesterday.
Yeah, that's how I would do it. Because we started off the review session talking about this. I thought it might be cool to kind of build this out, but we actually have this mapped out pretty well. Like, we know what this is going to look like. So yeah, let's go ahead. Let's create users and set up authentication. This had a whole bunch of steps. I do not remember all of the steps, but I remember that I made a list of the steps at Mikhail's suggestion and put it in our demos and notes code. So I'm actually just going to go into yesterday's notes and scroll all the way down. And these are all the steps that we need to do. I'm actually just going to pull up, frankly, the lesson as a reference, because it's actually a very good guide for all the details of each of these steps. And I'm just going to have these ready to go as guide code as I build this out. Right. And I think what I'll do is I'll just kind of copy this list and we'll just dump this right here, and I'll close this out to give us a little real estate and we can see what we need to do. So I love lists having, you know, being able to check stuff off. Yeah, we'll just leave it like this. So we've created the user app. Now we need to create our user model and inherit from abstract user. And I'm just going to have my guide code with me for this, because this authentication stuff has a bunch of different steps and I don't want to screw it up. And there's not anything really specific to my application. And this is what I do when I'm writing code. Like, I'm not going to, copying code is counterproductive because there's always little things that need to change. But I think, like, you know, there's a whole universe of code out there for a reason. Because I don't remember that, oh, abstract users imported from Django.contrib.auth.models, and there's no value in me remembering that. So let's just make a class named user that inherits from abstract user. I am going to do a quick sanity check to make sure that Django's not going to complain about, yeah, I think I'm going to name it different because Django has its own user model. I just don't want to get confused, and I'm honestly not sure if like this overlaps with some sort of magic name that Django uses. And this way, whenever I import this, I know just from the name without even having to look at the import path that this is my user. So the user needs an email field, right? And again, let's just, I think, put the minimum of what we need here. I'm not even going to worry about max length right now in the email field. There's one thing that's really important to add to the email field for authentication specifically. Can anyone remind me what that is? Gary, yes, sir.
Would it be unique? True.
Yeah, exactly. And why is this important for authentication?
So there's only one account per email.
Yeah, exactly. And then what do I have to do to this user model as well so that Django knows to use the email field when a user logs in? Brandon, yes, sir. Well, I have to tell Django that we're not going to use a field named username because Django thinks in terms of usernames and passwords. We're telling Django that the username field is going to be email, and we're going to tell Django that there are no other required fields. As long as we're creating this user, we might as well add a couple other properties here to make it interesting. Let's give the user a name. Maybe a display name. So we can see something interesting for that info endpoint. And let's give this a max length of 50. And let me fix my typo. And let's give this user an address. And this is going to be a text field, so it's going to be bigger. And we're going to give it a default value just so it has something really more for us for debugging than anything else. And let's give the user an age. And let's make this an integer field. And can someone remind me, like, how do I apply some validators to this? Let's say that by default, the user age is 18, just so there's an age. But how do I add validators, say, to make sure that, someone can't be 500 years old? Oh, Len, yes, sir.
You can add the min-max value with the built-in validator.
Yeah, exactly. I have to pass an argument named validators, and that takes a list. And then I can use, well, I gotta import them. And then we can use min-max validators exactly like you were saying.
Maybe just a min, like min 18 and no max, because you could be technically infinite, maybe 100. I don't know.
Sure, we can, if we want to design it that way, we totally can. Let's do V. Let me get back into VS Code. We'll say that someone has to be at least 18. Brandon, yes, sir.
Does this count 0 as a positive integer?
I believe 0 is a positive integer. Let's double check.
It doesn't matter because we have a min value, but I was just curious.
Okay, so 0 is classified as a non-negative. That's a good question. Django positive integer field. So my guess is it probably doesn't, but let's see if Django tells us. So must be either positive or 0. So Django has decided that it will count positive as 0 as a positive integer field. Yeah, that's a good question, and that's like a good kind of thing to be aware of. For sure. So just running down this list, we've made our user model, we've inherited from abstract user, we've specified email. This is a pretty big one. Update settings.py in all the places we need. So I'm just gonna pull up kind of my guide code here to follow along with. Right, we've taken care of this. We need to now tell Django in settings.py what model is going to be used for authentication, is going to be our user model for authentication. So let's go into settings.py. Let's just maybe put it all right here. Here's auth passwords, so maybe just putting it right after that. I don't think it makes a significant difference where we put it. User app, app user, and let me make sure I have that name right. App user. And as long as I'm doing this, I might as well do the other Django related or settings.py related stuff for authentication. This we've done already, but I need to add this. And this I am going to copy paste because I don't want to have a typo, and it's kind of the same thing every time. So that should do it. If we kind of look at the list here, we've now updated settings.py for all the stuff. We've set the auth user model, we've updated installed apps, we've done that, and now we have to drop the database, make migrations, and rerun migrations to make Django admin happy. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to want to disconnect from this database, otherwise I won't be able to drop it. Let's create it again, so that once we apply the migrations, there's a database to run those migrations against. And now over here, I'm just going to run manage py, make migrations. I created a new user model. There's going to be a migration there. And now let's actually have Django use those migrations to modify our database, right? Let's apply them against our database. And as a sanity check, I'm going to run the server. I know that the routing, right? We saw this issue because I haven't actually built this URL's py out yet, but it's the error I'm expecting to see and not the error I'm not expecting to see. So I think I should be pretty good to go there. And if we kind of hop back to our to-do list here, and I'm going to delete this stuff just so that we have a little more room, and also because this is in that other doc, so it's there. So we've done that. And then, so now we would get into actually making all the routes for authentication and info and the user and all of that. And maybe when we're done adding some user fixture data, the Django admin stuff, we're not going to worry about. Right, so this would be, these are our next steps. And I just want to check in to see what questions people have or what things might be useful to look at with the code that we were just writing for authentication. Erica, yeah.
So for like a super user, are we leaving that like a manager? Are we leaving that for later, or should we like do that now too?
We should do that for later because that's specifically for Django admin. If you remember, you know, you log into Django admin and you have this nice GUI in the browser to interact with the database. So unless you specifically plan to be using Django admin or want it, we don't have to worry about it. That's a good question. I also see your question in X-ray questions about is active, which is a very good point. We don't have any users yet, but as we saw yesterday, if we connect to our database and let me clear this so we have a little room. And if we look at like all the different tables, we now have this, where is it hiding? User app user table. And to make it even better, it's user app user, because Django has long names. And we saw that there's this is active column. That's a Boolean. Oh, I'm sorry, your question was from yesterday. But to close the loop on it, we saw yesterday is active gets set to true by default. When we have a running app, if I wanted to deactivate a user account, I would just set is active to false for that user. Okay, so I think, like Len was saying, we might as well just get authentication working, right? That's the best way to make sure that I don't have any errors in this model code, is to write the rest of what I need end to end to be able to use Thunder Client to manually test this. Does that sound good to folks? Awesome, let's do it. And as you can see, like I spend a lot of time on like setup and writing stuff out in advance. I find it incredibly helpful. Because then I like being able to separate like design and thinking from implementation and coding. Because there's so many details with implementation and coding, and it's so easy to make an error. You know, it's like if you're on a road trip and it's a really long one, it's great to have a navigator who can have the map or Google Maps. If you're going on a long road trip by yourself and then you need to, you know, make a bunch of turns and have a bunch of directions, it's great to either have Google Maps, or if you don't have Google Maps, write out your map, you know, where you're going in advance. Len, yes, sir.
Before we crush authentication, can we just, it's at the top of the hour, and I know I think in an hour is when we're gonna start.
Oh, yeah.
So can we just take a 5, like quick, as you say, a real 5? And then come back and just like, because I think there's still a lot to go.
Yeah.
And not a lot of time.
Thank you very much for the suggestion. That's a great call. Let's take a real 5, and then when we return, we'll knock out authentication and move on to the lists. Thank you so much for the reminder, because I was definitely zoned in there. Take 5, everyone, and then we will pick it back up. Let's keep on rolling. So we've created this app user, this abstract user for authentication. We want to finish up our authentication so we can start building out our lists, right? And we've gotten pretty far. We're going to have to make a post endpoint for sign up and the sign up API view, log in and log out API views. And then we're going to want to make this info API view. And that actually does touch on one of the feature requirements for this application, which is, if I hop back over here, for the user's endpoint, we actually need to make a /API/users. We want to be able to update the password, and we want to be able to update these other properties. And that's actually going to be a put, and we're probably going to want a get as well, to be honest. So I might as well just put this right here. Right, edit returns user info, but not password, something like that. So let's go ahead and create this code. I know, I think I'm just going to copy this stuff and bring it up to the top of sort of my task list. Right, let's we'll leave that there, but this is kind of what we need to do. My task list is getting a little messy, so I apologize. But what we're going to do is we're going to make API views. And we're gonna need probably, we might just need the one for users. No, I lied because we have all these different endpoints. We need one for sign up, we need one for login, we need one for logout, and we need one for info, basically. And then I'm gonna want to, you know, set up token authentication like we did the other day. So let's dive in and start building some of this stuff. So I'm gonna go to URLs.py. There's a ton of stuff we're going to need to import for this. So I'm just gonna import everything and talk through what we need all of it for as we go. We're gonna need to import a validation error exception in case we need to raise any exceptions. We're going to need to import from Django the functions for logging in, logging out, and authenticating. And that comes from Django contrib auth. We're going to need to import from Django REST framework, the API view. I like to organize if my imports start to get crazy. I like to organize them a bit. From Django REST framework, we're going to need to import the HTTP response class that we use. We're going to need to import a whole bunch of HTTP status codes from Django REST framework. Right, and to be honest, it's not the worst thing to actually copy and paste this stuff when you're doing this. But for review purposes, I want to code it out and talk about it. From Django REST framework, we're going to need to import more stuff for authentication permissions. We need this token authentication class, this is authenticated class, and the token class, all of which we walked through it pretty in depth yesterday. Right, the actual auth token models. And that should be most of it. Fingers crossed. We'll see if I forgot something. And then finally, from our own code, we need to import our app user model. So let's go ahead and let's make our sign up class. And of course, this is going to be an API view. And this is going to take a post request. I'm going to make a copy of the request data. And then we need to use email as username. So now that I've made a copy of the request body, I'm going to set username to email because we just want our user to send email and password. Look like that. I don't think we're going to give the user the option of using a username for now. What we can do if we want actually is I can write the code like this, where if for some reason we want to give the user the option of both, first we check if username is there in that request body in that Python dictionary. And if it's not, as the default, we get the email, which should always be there. So this certainly isn't going to hurt to do it that way. And now we need to create the user, right? And this is where I ran into trouble yesterday. And we're going to pass in we're actually not gonna do that, because that was exactly the error that I did yesterday. And I'm just gonna use this guide code to make sure I get this right as I scroll down a bit to find the bit that I want. And this was where I ran into trouble yesterday. So let's get this one right off the bat. Create user data, right? And in fact, I wrote something slightly different in the guide code, and I think I'll just refer to that. Because I think the way I did it, we also got a little validation in there. And since we know that that code worked, why mess with something when we already had to spend all of that time debugging it? I don't think we need this line of code here on line 27, but it's not gonna hurt. So we might as well just, to avoid potential unknowns, do what we already did. Right, and we're not getting the validation with full clean and whatever, but that's okay. It will probably throw an error, and this should just be app. Either. And we'll write our code for our error response, so we get a bit of a message back. And most importantly, set the status to be a 400 bet request. And it would help if I made this the right kind of response with the Django response class. And now we have our error response case. So we're creating the user. Now we need to create the auth token and log the user in. So I'm going to do token equals token objects. Create user equals new user. And then and fix that typo. And then use Django's login method. And I'll just pass in the request, which again, we probably, as we saw, there's actually a couple different ways we can use login, but this should work just fine where we pass in the request. So I don't know if we need anything here in the body of the request for the login function. We can actually take a quick look. It definitely expects the request, so if nothing else, we have to pass it in. So I don't know if it's doing anything with that request object, but it will be unhappy if it's not there because it expects it as the first argument. The main thing is we pass in the new user here, and then they get logged in. And now let's return a response where let's send back our new user's email and the auth token. And token is an instance of the token model, and we want token.key, which has that token value. Right. I think I might as well pass back as well, because our user model has a display name. Let's send that back as well. So now I should have a working sign up API view. Let's hook it up in the URLs.py and see if it works.
Do you need to call the 2201 HTTPS status?
That would be best practice, and I totally forgot to do that. So let me go ahead and add that right now. That's a great call. Thank you. This response object is awful big, so let's put it here. And now we can do response data, status equals HTTP Yeah, it won't break, but Erica, you're totally right. That's the correct status code to send back. So now, fingers crossed, I can, oh yeah, I need to update this. Let's import from our code. And you make sure I have the name right. Sign up. Import. Sign up. And this makes me a little nervous that Django isn't giving me. Oh, John, yes, sir.
It's in the views.py.
Oh my God. This is why I run my code every 5 minutes, because I make so many typos. Thank you so much, man. And now we can do sign up as view, and fingers crossed, this should actually be a working path. Let's use Thunder Client to test it out. I'm going to take a quick look at the model to refresh myself on the information we should be able to pass. Email, display name, address, age. So let's try it out. And we can kind of push this code off to the side because we're not looking at it very much right now. And this is going to be a post request. And I don't want any headers. And all this stuff is going to go in the body. And I've got my server running. So let's try email alice@gmail.com. Display name Alice. Password. I'm just going to use password for everything because it's incredibly easy to remember. Address 123 Mary Lane, somewhere made up. Age, say 18. It's because it's Alice in Wonderland. And I think those are all our fields. So fingers crossed, this works. And I forgot the port. Let's try it one more time. So we got a 404 not found. Let me hit it one more time so I can get a clean error message in the console. Not found /API/signup. So this is good news. I probably just have a silly typo. Let's look at my URLs.py. That's empty there. Let's look at the URLs. And that would, of course, be the issue, is that it should probably look something like this. And in fact, it should be /users/signup. Right? If I go to the URLs.py for the whole project, it's API/users/signup. So let's try that again. Right? And when you're so deep in implementing, it's easy to forget this stuff. And now that works. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. And in fact, I'm just going to make file named Scratch. So I can put this stuff so I can grab it easily. And we get back some good information, the email, the display name, the token, exactly what we want. So we now have sign up working. Let's go ahead. Let's knock out login and log out. So login is also post request. We're going to follow the same pattern where we're just going to grab a copy of the request body's data. And again, because we're logging in, and in fact, I'm just going to copy the code I used here. And like maybe down the line, I'll refactor that into a helper function so I don't have duplicate code. But for now, in the interest of time, it's fine. And we're looking at, you know, 2 lines of code. But now we need to authenticate the user. Tim, yes, sir.
Yeah, when you do request.data.copy, is it just, I know we talked about it, but is it just a copy of the data that is used in this instance? Or is it a copy of the whole thing for everything?
Just the
If that
data in
makes
this
sense.
instance.
Just the data in instance. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I'm doing it just because as a practice, I don't want to modify the request itself. Right? This
Okay.
gives us a dictionary. We get
Yeah.
that JSON.
Yep,
Yep, exactly.
you get the dictionary data.
Yeah,
And it's just a
exactly.
copy of it that you use for this class
Exactly.
particularly.
Because I'm
Okay.
changing it right here. And
Yeah.
I want to keep a clean version that's the original unchanged in case I need to refer back to it.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's just clears it a little bit. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Daniel, yes, sir.
So is the request, what it's doing, is it taking the user input and turning it into a JSON data and sending that JSON data to the database and to see if it's valid?
We don't talk to the database at this point. What happens is this is going to create an HTTP request, right? When I hit send in Thunder Client, the same way where here in the browser, every time I hit enter, it's sending a get HTTP request to that URL. We're sending a post HTTP request to this URL. This JSON is part of that HTTP request in what's called the body of the request. And then what Django actually does, actually, let's go to Settings.py. This stuff here called middleware that we haven't really talked about, this is a whole bunch of functions. When Django gets an HTTP request, it literally like runs these middleware functions more or less in order. And note security, session, authentication, right? Things that we're starting to interact with more. And it does all this first. Right? So think of it as like, you know, post, API, users, sign up. Right? If this is our HTTP request that's sent as text across the internet, it's run through all this middleware. By the time it's done through the middleware, Django has constructed an instance of the request object, or if you want to HTTP request, right? Django has HTTP request, Django REST framework has request. This is actually what then gets fed into URL patterns. And then that's actually what gets fed into our API view code. Right? Which is why by the time we get to our API view, this is an object and this is a dictionary. Django's already done all that work. Does that help answer your question, Daniel?
Yeah, and we use the models from user to validate it, right?
That is part of what we do, yes. Though for logging in, it's more about the other authentication stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Cody, yes, sir.
Real quick, maybe in like 20 seconds, can you show why it's API/user/signup instead of API/signup? Just that logical line of code.
Yeah, totally. Right here on line 23.
And then
This is the main, yeah, this is the main URLs PY for the whole app, right? I just forgot when I was typing in Thunder Client. If I change this, it would just be API/signup.
Okay, and then where's the sign up? Like, where does it show the follow on from the APU users slash?
Right here in the URLs PY for our users app.
And then what makes that like a child of the original?
Yeah, good question. If we go to the original, and let me clear this. See this include statement?
Include. Okay, copy. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every Python file is a module. We're importing that module. Raven, yes, sir. And then I do want to move on in the interest of time.
Hopefully it's a quick question. Just to add on to Daniel's question, where is it storing it? Is it going to Postgres when we use the dot object? What is it? Dot object create user? Is that storing it in Postgres, or how does it go to our database?
Yeah, great question. It is storing it in Postgres. This dot objects is part of the querying pattern and working with Django models, right? So like, you've also seen, I'll just type it down here, but app user objects all. Maybe, I don't know, get ID equals 1, again, query DB. And so this saves that data to the database. All right, let's, and good question, because I think the Django querying pattern is the stuff that's a bit trickier. Let's knock out log in, log out, and info. I think that'll be a good point to pause and do more questions. And that way we can also make sure to have enough time to be able to spend some quality time on lists and tasks and those relationships and serializers. But this is really good stuff. I really like digging into this more at this level. So please keep the questions coming. And I'll just let folks know if we have to move on in the interest of time. And let me actually double check X-ray questions. If you have a question that I have to move on from, actually, please throw it in X-ray questions so that a TA or a classmate can respond. Because I think there was at least one hand up. So please throw your question into X-ray questions. All right, so we're working on login. And the thing with login is that we need to validate, or rather, I should say, authenticate our user's password. And we have to use Django's authenticate function to do that. We pass it two arguments. The first is the username. And again, this is just consistency. We're using email as username. In terms of logging in, Django thinks in terms of username and password. So we might as well make things look the way Django expects so our code is easier to read. And the password. Let's just print the user, see if that works. If we've gotten the user, which is where I ran into trouble yesterday, now that we've authenticated the user, that this password is correct for this user, let's log them in. Once Django has logged in a user, we can then create a token for them. And we use the token model. And Raven, like you were asking, token objects, and then this method get or create that will grab a token from the database if it's already there for our user, or if it's not, create it. And you can just pass the token model the instance of our user model, right? And so it returns a token and a Boolean. And basically what it's doing is, if user, if token exists, select star from token where user equals user. Actually, let me get rid of that just so we have the SQL in one line. Or if the token doesn't exist, it will do something like insert token. I don't know the exact SQL, but something more or less like this, right? We're either going to be getting data from the database or putting data in. And at this point, once we've gotten the user, it's pretty smooth sailing. We're just going to return that token and some information about the user in our response. Let me look at the README to see if it specifies the format that we have to send this stuff back in. I don't think it does. For purposes of consistency, I'll do what I did up here, email, display name, token. And in fact, for purposes of consistency, I'm just going to copy line 40 and put it right there. Right, because the nice thing about following this pattern is right now I have a little bit of repeated code, but later on I can go back and refactor this more easily into a helper function or something if I want. And we might as well send a 200 response status, though I think that's what it does by default. If we don't find the user, we need to return an error response. And let's just say invalid login credentials. And we'll send back an HTTP 400 bad request. So let's test this out. Let's see if I can log Alice in, even though Alice is already logged in. Let me get rid of display name. Get rid of address, get rid of age. We're going to change this to login. And it would help if I actually modified the views.py for the user app. I'm sorry, urls.py. Right? We need to actually make our login endpoint and import our login API view. And now let's try this request. And lo and behold, it works. That's the beauty of getting stuck and making mistakes and debugging is it gets burned into your brain. Like I wrote it right this time. And once we have the logout endpoint, we can test it for real, but this is a pretty good sign. So let's go ahead and let's implement that logout endpoint. And before I do that, I need to set up a little helper for authentication because I only want a logged in user to be able to log out. So what I'm going to do is set up the stuff that Django needs to apply authentication and permissions using token authentication. And note how this inherits the API view class. So now I can use this anywhere and I get a full-on API view, but with this stuff already set up. And that's what I'm going to do right now for logout. Logging out is also a post request. And it's pretty straightforward. That middleware stuff that we were talking about, that's why for an HTTP request that has that token, Django's middleware will just get the user for us and stick an instance of that user model on the request object. So I can do request.user, and this is my user model for my authenticated user. And that user model is connected to the token table, right? We were talking about related names to the token model. This is an R code, but this is a Django model. Token model, one-to-one field to user, related name, auth token. The fact that Django REST framework wrote its code this way is why I can do user.auth token. Right? The related name lets us connect the two things in the relationship in the other direction. we've got the one-to-one field. So, you know, I can do like, you know, my token dot user, no sweat, right? We see how the one-to-one relationship sets that up for us, where with these object-oriented models, Django will keep track of these relationships and then Postgres stores it with all the primary and foreign keys and stuff. But then when we add a related name, we can go in the other direction and do user.auth underscore token. And I just want to check in to see if folks have any questions about that, because I think this is really important and a useful thing to cover. Tim, yes, sir.
Yeah, so when you authenticate the token with the one-to-one field, will it display information if it's not one-to-one? Will it display the information that isn't?
The only
Or-
kind of relationship between a user and a token that can exist is a one-to-one field, because that's how the
Okay,
token
yeah.
model is written. Yeah,
So for every single data point about that user, it needs to be one-to-one field or it won't display? That's what I'm asking, I guess.
yeah. It's remember, at the end of the day, the models are stored as tables in Postgres. What this is saying is that the token table has a foreign key column that has user ID. And in fact, we can go right in here and take a look at it. Select star from, man, what is it? Token. Right? This is the token table in the database for Django authentication. It's got these three properties: key, created, user ID. Django has also set rules that foreign key user ID. I don't know if they put it, the unique constraint right here. It has to be unique. The Django model and Postgres enforces that one-to-one relationship between the user table and the token table, which our models reflect.
I see. That makes so much sense. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So we've got our request.user.auth token. And because that's a model instance, it's got methods including delete. And so to log the user out, we just delete that token. We also use Django's logout method because there's some other stuff Django does under the hood with logging in and logging out. And we can just pass it the request. And then when this succeeds, we return a response of status equals HTTP 204. And I think once we get this done, I really want to get that info endpoint done. I think I might just burn through that because I want to make sure we spend enough time with lists and tasks. Though I think this stuff is really useful to see, and a lot of this relates. But let's test out logout. And to test logout, I need a token. In fact, I think I'm just going to log Alice in again, because every time Alice gets logged in, let's see, the token is F2CC5, blah, 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 blah. Okay, it's still using the same token. Django did not delete that token, which makes sense. So we can use that. And over here, I can do /users/logout, though we have to add that path, which we'll do in just a moment. We don't need anything in the body of the request. In the request headers, we add an authorization header. We have to tell our server Django that we're using token authentication, and we put the token there. And let's go ahead and in URLs.py for our user app, let's add logout. Just as a sanity check, I'm going to kill and restart the server. Like, my rule of thumb is if I'm not sure, I just do it so I don't have to think about it too much. And we get a 204 no content. Great sign. Let's try logging Alice in. That's going to be our real moment of truth. I need to make sure I'm not passing an authorization header for login, because that could cause problems with Django. I think Django will return some sort of error, but I'm not certain. In this JSON text that we send in the body of the request, we need to send our user's email and password. And that worked. We have a new token. So in fact, I'm going to copy that and paste it in Scratch and get rid of the old one. So we now have just manually tested and QA'd that all the things we need for sign up, login, and log out are working. Just to close the loop, I'm going to create some fixture data for Alice. I don't think we need the token stuff. So over here in the user app, I'm going to make a file named, or a directory named fixtures. Let me make sure it's a directory. And I don't exactly remember the dump data command, so I'm going to use my favorite command, Control R. And it's Python manage py dump data. User app, right? Django app dot model name. And let me make sure I got that model name right. Yeah, I'm not being as consistent as I need to be in my names here. I apologize, because all these other ones did not look uppercase like that. And then this is going into user app fixtures, user data. And so now, fingers crossed. So note, this is how the password is actually stored in the database. It's been hashed, right? Django uses an algorithm so that when we log in, it actually turns the actual password into this every time and compares the two. I think this is all we need. So this is great, because now if I have to drop my database, I have a user, I don't have to recreate them. I just have to remember that the password is password. I don't know who that is because it says Zoom user, but yes, what's up?
It's Momo.
Yeah, I just want to ask about the password. Is this change every time?
No, it does not.
The hashing?
It does not change every time.
So it's the same, huh?
Yes, and that's how the authenticate function works.
Okay.
Hashing is a little out of scope to discuss right now, but it's pretty interesting, and it's not that complicated. But essentially there's an algorithm that does it. I'm just gonna quickly code up, I think, because we're almost coming up on time. Let's see. I think we need to get some relationships going. I think we need to switch gears and do that. I apologize that, I mean, it's always a tight day, but this has been a really good discussion. I've just been hesitant to cut stuff short. Let me quickly code up what the info endpoint looks like, and so we just have it. So it's going to look like this. It's going to be the base root, so it's just API slash users. And it's going to need to be authenticated, so it's going to have a token request. We're going to do a get request. That is going to do something really simple. And I think it's just going to return response, and we're gonna put a dictionary in here. Email request user email. In fact, we can probably just do it. I'll just do it like this because I'm not sure if request.user returns the password or not, which I don't want. Email, display name, address, age. That seems about right. Pretty sure this returns a 200 response by default. To do send error response if valid. Not going to worry about that right now. Let's just test this out real quick. Make sure that works as a sanity check. It should look something like this. We're going to use this token that we just got for Alice, who should be logged in. And I don't need anything in the body of this request, so I'm just going to leave that there. And I'm going to update the authorization header to use the new token. And the server is not running. That would help. And I need to click to actually use the auth token. And that's working. This is clearly not the actual display name. This looks like the password. And now that's working. So let's build out the more interesting part of the info endpoint, which is going to be the put request for modifying user data. And really, the only part of this I'm going to focus on is changing the password. To do, we make a copy of our existing data. Let's also just grab the user. And now
You put an R in user.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. This is, I just don't want to use user. I just want this to be, so I just don't have to type request.user all of the time. And now what we're going to do is update display name, etc. And I'm going to say, hey, for this user, set their display name equal either to display name, or if we haven't updated the display name in this info request, use the existing one. To do update other fields. So I think just having the one here, we can test that out and see that that works. The password is a little more interesting and where I think it's important to point out a specific step involved. Let's get the current password. So what we want to do here is if we see, password foo, and we see new password bar, we only change the password if both of these things are in the request body. So let's check that the current password has been passed, and let's check to see if there's a new password as well. If there is, we have to authenticate and log our user in. let's double check that our authenticated user is indeed the user in the request. Though actually, I don't think that's necessary. But it certainly won't hurt to have, because this is, yeah, this is already an authenticated request, so I don't think that's necessary. And probably leave, but not sure. So here's the important step. To actually change a password, we have to use a specific method. I actually have to call set password. In order to change the user's password. And I'm going to be very lazy right now and copy all of that. And just return all that stuff. And we're gonna put a little to do here. Let's also maybe say like this is totally a hack, but just in the interest of time. So this is the important step here, where if we're changing a user's password, I have to use this set password method. And that's what I wanted to point out. And we need to do validation, and we need to save that change. Earl John, yes, sir.
So is set underscore password and new underscore password a attribute for the abstract user?
Set password is a method on the abstract user, yes. New password is just the name we chose for one of those JSON fields in the body of the request.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, good question. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. If we dig into abstract user, we'll find a set password method hiding in there somewhere. Okay, I apologize that we burned through this, and I realize we're really tight on time. I think we have to push the retro back by about 10 minutes because we need to be able to spend a little bit more time on lists and models. Does that sound good to everyone? Okay. Let me shoot a message in our team channel, letting Francisco and everyone else know. And let's we're gonna push it back by 20 minutes. That'll buy us about 25 minutes, which I think is enough time for lists and models, especially because there's a lot of similar things that we've dug into. Authentication also is, the newest and most recent thing. So I think it's good that we spend time digging into it. Let's take 5, and then we'll reconvene and we'll build out lists and models. Sound good to folks? Okay, awesome. Thank you, everyone, and see you all in 5 minutes. Awesome. So we've already mapped out. Somewhere in here is hiding, here we go, the relationships between our models. In fact, we have this awesome diagram floating all the way over here. And it's a bunch of one-to-many relationships, right? There's also a lot of really similar fields. List name, completed. Task name, completed. Subtask name, completed. Right? So as I build these models out, starting with the list model, we're going to show a technique to avoid some duplication of common fields and kind of add some good abstractions to our code. So let's go ahead and start writing code. I'll just kind of leave this off in the corner over there. So our list model, it needs a name. Just going to make it a char field, not going to worry about validation. And we need to know if all the tasks on the list have been completed or not, if the list is done. And this will be a Boolean field, and its default will be false. Now, a user can have many lists. Each list belongs to only one specific user. So our relationship between list and user is many to one. So we're going to create this user field and do models.foreign-key. We're going to need to import our user model. And that's the first argument we pass here. So Django knows what model to connect to make this many-to-one relationship to. I need to tell Django if the user gets deleted, delete all the user's lists. And I want to be able to easily refer to all the lists that the user has when I'm working with that user class, right? And so this way I can do, my user.lists with this related name property right here by setting that on the foreign key. Now, name and completed, these are all over the place for task, subtask, and so on, right? So let's do a little bit of refactoring and make sort of a template model that we can use for lists and subtasks and tasks that just has name and completed. And we're going to call this base template. Use for lists, tasks, subtasks, so we can reduce code duplication. It's going to be a class. It's going to inherit. It's going to be a model. And we're going to give it these fields. In fact, I'm going to steal these fields from the list class and put them on here. But I need to tell Django this is meant to be inheriting. So we can't use an abstract class directly for models, but I can create a model and tell Django that we're going to use it like an abstract class. That over here, list will inherit from that, and then it gets these nice things. And I can use this now for tasks and subtasks as well. And let's actually go ahead and let's just go through like one at a time and build all those things out. And I think I'm going to close this out and do a split. And let's go to task at models.py. And let's build out our task, and we can see these two right next to each other as we're doing it. And once we do this, I'll circle back and make some serializers. I think maybe after all the models are done. So I want to use that base template model that I created. So I need to import it. And I'm going to actually want to use the list model as well. And the task needs a couple things, right? Name comes from base template. Completed comes from base template. I don't have to add those fields. Because we inherit them here from this. The task should probably have a description. And let's just make it a text field. And we need to connect a task to its list. Many tasks, one list. So again, we're going to do, we'll call it parent list for simplicity, and use a foreign key field. We need to tell Django that the many-to-one relationship is established between a task and a list. We need to tell it what to do on delete. Again, if the list is deleted, we should delete all the tasks. And we should add this related name. And I need to steal a little bit of space here. I apologize. And let's just write it like this, just for readability. Tasks. Right, so that I can do my list dot tasks, and that's what the related name gets us. Now, there's actually something kind of cool we can do here, because a subtask will have this too. A subtask is also going to have a description. So let's make another template. And let's call it task template. Let's inherit that base template there. So name and completed come from that. And let's put description right here. And here, let's inherit from task template. And I also have to add the tell Django this is meant to be inherited. And we have to do class meta abstract equals true. Right, and so now I have a list, I have a task, and let's do one more split here. And let's open up subtask and write this out. And I think you can all can kind of see the pattern that we're building up here. Where from the task app, I'm going to import the task model, because we have a many-to-one relationship between a subtask and a task, and our task template. And it would help if I added that model over there. And now the subtask task. It's actually really cool to write, because almost all I have to do is just import from there, right? And that gives me name, description, name completed, description. And all these are now coming from the task template. And now we have many subtasks belong to one task. So parent task equals models.foreign key. Again, if a task is deleted, its subtasks need to go as well. And again, and let's just buy a little more screen real estate here. We're going to set the related name subtasks so that I can do my task dot subtasks. Right. And so we can see how, like, by following this one pattern consistently, all of the sudden, like, my code becomes a whole lot easier to work with and reason about and write. In a moment, I think we'll make some serializers, and I don't know if we'll have time to make all of the view endpoints, but we'll get through at least a couple. I just want to pause and check in and see what questions folks have around the models and their relationships, and in particular, related names. Cody, yes, sir.
Can you quickly show where the difference between the task and the subtask is? Just the description of it, I guess.
Oh, yeah, there's basically no difference. They're exactly the same. They each have a name. They each have a description. They each can be completed, a Boolean. The difference is, you know, very simply that oh, a subtask just lives inside a task, while a task lives inside a list.
Okay. Yeah, so like say get dressed is the task. Subtask is put socks on. Where is get dressed in your code and then put sock on in your code?
If the list is like, you know, go to work in the morning, and then the task is get dressed, then the subtask is put socks on.
Right. Where's that description actually at? Like where do you see that? Or is that in the database, I guess? Where would you grab that from the database? I think that's where I'm looking for the difference.
That's probably going to be in the view code. Like we haven't actually created, like our code doesn't have any code to create lists or tasks. Let me go ahead and apply these models though, because that is something that I need to do. And actually, let me run the server. It looks like I have a typo somewhere in the list app. So I wrote an awful lot of code without running anything, which I hate to do. And indeed, this needs to be related name. Okay, so that's good. We've created our migrations. Let's go ahead and apply them. Let's take a quick look in pSQL. So we now have these tables, list app list, right? Task app task, subtask app subtask. There's no data in these tables, but let's look at them. List app list has ID name completed and user ID, right? Which is our foreign key so that one user can have many different lists. Task app task has ID name completed description and the ID of the list that it belongs to. Because a list can have a whole bunch of tasks like take a shower, put on my clothes, so on. Subtask, basically same values as task, but the foreign key relationship is the parent task so that we can track that relationship in our database and our data model. I'm not sure if that was what you were wondering about, but hopefully that's useful in seeing the relationships between these tables and their respective models.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's write some serializers, and I think we'll have just enough time to knock out some view logic, though probably not for all of them. So let's just run down the list. Let's make a serializer for lists, in fact, and all these serializers, full disclosure, are going to be pretty darn simple. I need to import the model I'm making a serializer for. I need to import the serializer model serializer class from Django REST framework. And for the moment, that's all I need to do. We're gonna there's a little more we're gonna need to import in a minute, but let's make our list serializer. And it's gonna inherit model serializer. And serializers need class meta, where we tell it what model the serializer uses. Remember, a serializer really like wraps a class. Or wraps a model, excuse me. A serializer has a whole model living inside of it. So it can do all those nice model-y things. And the list serializer uses the list model. And we're going to say fields all. Quick question. Will this list serializer be able to print out all the tasks belonging to this list? So the answer is no, right? And the reason is the serializer is not smart enough to figure out many-to-one relationships on its own. It's going to need some help. We're going to need to have to tell the serializer how to do that. But we're actually going to use the task serializer to help us with that. So let's go ahead and let's make our task serializer. I'm just going to copy this code, paste it, and we're going to import task instead of list. And this is not a list serializer, but it's a task serializer. And in fact, we're going to have the same issue. It'd be really nice to see all of the subtasks in a task in our task serializer. So in fact, maybe we want to go ahead and make a subtask serializer and get that done. And then we can use it in our other places. Depending on how we want to do it. But let's see what that would look like. And let me go ahead and for a subtask, let's create serializers. Why? I'm going to go ahead, going to copy this, paste it in there. We're going to import subtask. This is now a subtask serializer. Its model is subtask. Now, what I can do over here in my task serializer is let's import the subtask serializer. Let's create a serializer field named subtasks. And let's use the subtask serializer. And we have to tell the serializer, as we have to tell serializers, that it's going to be serializing many things, a list of things. So hopefully my task serializer will now be able to handle showing all the subtasks in a task. And as you all may be able to guess, we're going to follow this same pattern with the list serializer. We're going to import from the task app task serializer, and I'm in the wrong spot. This is our list serializer, which is why it's always a good idea to do something like list app serializer.py. So it's easier for me to see in my code where I am. And right here, now we're going to import from the task app serializer. And we're going to use it to create a serializer field on our list named tasks, so that our list can show all the tasks it has. So now our serializers can really leverage each other. We are definitely coming up on time because we're almost at the 20-minute mark. So again, I apologize that we didn't get the full-on walkthrough of this. Let's implement, I think, creating a list. Let's actually pause here because I don't think there's a lot of point in me trying to cram this in 2 minutes. And maybe what we'll do is we'll just pick this up after lunch. And because I think we've got a little bit, like probably, I think in another 20 minutes, we could cover everything we need. So let me look at the schedule for the rest of the day and find some time for us. Sound good to everyone? Okay, awesome. And I hope this was all right. Just to briefly kind of recap where we were in the Django review. We're building the Django to-do app, and we got pretty darn far. We have a list model, and we use this cool template approach. We have a task model, where again, we're just leveraging inheritance. So these fields that are the same, like the list, the task, the subtask, all have a name field. They all have a completed field. So why repeat the work? And then both task and subtask have a description field, because task and subtask are almost the same thing, right? Like we were seeing before, really the only difference here is, and let me just pull up the annotation tool. The list table, right, is pretty clear. List connects to user ID. The task table connects to a list. Or I should say rather a row in the task table. And the subtask table, each subtask connects to a parent task. And we've already implemented authentication, and we spent a good amount of time on that. So I don't want to backtrack and review that too much. So I'm just going to do a quick sanity check to make sure that I didn't do anything silly with my code or forget anything, and just run the server. And I don't know, hit some sort of endpoint to make sure that it works, maybe like a login endpoint. Or actually, I think I can just hit the info endpoint that we implemented. And again, I just want to make sure my code is working and running. So let's just grab Alice's token and use it in the authorization header. And invalid token. I might as well log in, because we're going to need, once we create these lists, we're going to need to interact with them a little bit. And that's all going to happen in an authenticated fashion. So let's just go ahead and get a fresh auth token so that we'll have it when we need it. And also to help us kind of get our brains back into Django mode. And as always, I forgot the trailing slash. And now we've got a fresh auth token. I've also gotten confirmation that I don't have any typos or silliness that I forgot about in my code. So we are good to go, and let's build out our serializers. So the serializers for the list, the task, these are pretty straightforward. And actually, we built these out. And the main thing here is line 8, right? The list serializer is gonna have a field that's not part of the list model that we're gonna create, and we're gonna tell the list serializer, hey, for this field, you should use the task serializer. And because serializers wrap models, the serializers know about the relationships. So the list serializer for like my list can find my tasks and use the task serializer for them. So that's sort of the key thing there, because we do that pattern with the task serializer with subtasks. And then with the subtask serializer, there's not a lot to do. Right? And so where we left off was actually starting to write these views, right? And these endpoints. So let's go ahead and start adding the endpoints that we need. Just to recap, and I'm going to do a split here so we can see this. And I'm going to get rid of the things I don't need at the moment. Thunder Client will want in just a minute. But let's pull up the URLs.py for the whole application. And the part we care about now is here on line 22. Right? We care about this API/lists. That's what we're going to add stuff onto. And in fact, and let me go ahead and import, well, we don't have API views yet, so let's make some views for the list app. And in fact, let's go to the views for the user app, and I'm just going to copy all of these imports now that we've walked through them and dump them into my list app views. And I'm going to kind of use the VS Code sort of breadcrumb notation here to make sure I'm in the right file. And I'll just add this that views UI because I like it. Right, so these are pretty much all the imports that we need. I can now write all lists API view. Brandon, yes, sir.
You have a double render on line 3 and 4.
Oh, thank you. And let me ask you all a quick question. Does the user have to be logged in and authenticated to create a list and look at their lists? And it's a little bit of an unfair question because the answer is pretty straightforward and the answer is yes, right? That's the behavior that we want for this application. So I'm going to hop back to the user app and I'm also going to steal, if we hop down in the code, I'm not even going to steal, I'm just going to import this token rec class because I can use it to set authentication on my views. So let me go ahead and import that. And let's just do that right here in the code part. From user app views, import, right? Request that has to be handled with token authentication, where token authentication has to be on. And, you know, we're going to need the list model. So let's grab that too. And so now this all lists API view will have token authentication. Let's write that get endpoint just to return a list of all the lists, even though we have none right now. But this is by far the simplest thing to write, so it's a great place to start. Let's use a try except so that we can handle errors. And I'm going to use, and let's put except just to make the squigglies go away. And actually, what I really need to import is the list serializer. I may not, in fact, need the model at all. Let's see. So my list serializer is going to turn, I'm going to query the database for all of my lists. And then the list serializer will turn that into a dictionary. And then Django will turn that into an array. And here's the great thing. Because this is now like an auth route, we have request.user.lists. And that gives us, off of the user model, the lists model and all of the lists for that user as like a Django query set or whatever Django returns for that. And so we're querying the database now for all of the lists belonging to the user who has this auth token. And when we make that query, we're going to tell the database to order that query, those query results by ID. And we're going to tell the serializer that you're going to be getting many things, not one. And now I can just return a response that has all lists.data, right? That's how the serializer exposes a dictionary with all the data. And then the response class will turn that into JSON. And we'll send back a 200 response. And for our error case, we're going to say, $400 bad request. Right now, I don't have any lists, but let's test this out. Let's grab that token that we just got when we logged in our user. Let's use it in this request. So there's nothing in the body of this request. We are setting the authorization header. I'm going to set it to the updated token. I guess it was already in there for Alice. And we're going to do API/lists, and it's going to be a get request. And fingers crossed, this will work. And it looks like, if I look down here, looks like I have a typo in URLs.py, my list app. That should be a quick fix. Indeed, it's because I never actually put anything in here because I started to import and was like, wait a second, that doesn't exist. So we import all lists. We have path. I also need to import include. Or I'm sorry, this is not actually include. This is our API view. And just for sanity, I'm gonna kill and restart this server to see if I have any typos, and let's try a request again. And we get back an empty array, which is exactly what I want, right? Because no lists exist yet. So now that we've got this done, let's write the post endpoint to handle creating a list. It's going to be the same route, right? API/lists, but it's going to be a post request and we're going to pass data. So as always, I'm just going to grab a copy of my data so I don't have to think about it. Let's get the user ID because that might be useful when creating the list so we know who the list belongs to. And I'm just going to add that user property to this data dictionary because that's going to be useful for us in just a minute. We're going to use the serializer to construct an instance of the list model and validate it. And now that I've attached the user, I've added it to this data dictionary. Django can handle both the user object and the user ID. It will find the user object for both. So I can just do data equals data. And this now creates a new list that belongs to that user. Right, let's validate it. And if it's valid, let's save it. And let's return a success response. And let's return the list data, because that's probably useful, and an HTTP 201 success code. Otherwise, we have an error. Excuse me. Right, and a bad request. So now I should be able to test this out. What data do I need to pass for a list? Well, let's look at the list model real quick. Really, it just needs a name because completed is set to false by default. So over here, I can now make a post request to lists. I've got my auth token for Alice. And let's see how we do. Oh, and it looks like I jumped the gun a bit. The list is gonna need some tasks because the list serializer hooks into the task serializer, and when it does validation, it's going to ask for stuff. So we'll see how deep this rabbit hole goes, because we'll probably need to add some task data, and we'll see if subtasks are required or not. But let's just very quickly build this out and see if we can get away with an empty task list. Just with an empty array. And I ran into a little bit of an unexpected issue here. I think we'll be able to sort this out pretty quickly. The error is actually giving me some pretty good information. This create method does not support writable nested fields by default. So I think the serializer, the validation seems to want tasks, but then the creation part is not happy about the tasks. So let's see if there's a change that we can either make to our serializers or the app itself to solve this issue. And in some ways, the easiest might be if we go to the list model. I wonder if there's got to be a way to make this task serializer field optional. And I think that's the piece that I'm missing. So let's take just a minute and see if we can debug that. Otherwise, I may switch gears, but I think we should be able to sort this out. Oh, Brandon, yes, sir.
Did you just set a default value for tasks to be equal to an empty array?
I was thinking about that. That is a good thought. We have, if we go to the task model. So parent list is on the task model. Let's see if we can, if this null of truth is does something. And Brandon, yes, sir.
I had this exact problem yesterday when I was trying to make the to-do list app for that assignment. So I tried blank null equals true on that foreign key and it did not work.
Yeah.
The method that I had to do was go into the serializers for the list and then instead of using the task serializer, use the serializer method field to get all of the tasks instead. So it just can return an empty list.
Got it. That makes sense. Yeah, because the issue, there was a validation issue. Francisco, yes. I would love some thoughts.
Sorry, I might have missed the issue here. So you're trying to get the tasks aren't being fetched. Is that the issue?
Uh, we haven't created any lists or tasks. And I just wrote the post endpoint to create an empty list. And it looks like I'll just pull up the. So here's the request, right? A post onto lists, my very first list. And then we get this error detail string, the field is required. And that's coming from the validation code we call with the serializer right here. So I'm unsure if there's a way for us either on the model or maybe on the serializer to indicate that this tasks list can be empty or isn't required. Just to create a list that has no tasks. Because then I did try, if we just do this, what we ran into was,
I should still fail. Yeah.
this assertion error create method does not support writable nested fields, right? Which makes me think that, sorry, go ahead.
Well, one, I would suggest making a create method or a completely separate serializer. The create method might be better as far as doing this. But before we go too off track, just as a shot in the dark, if you go into your views and in that task serializer on line, or excuse me, list serializer on line 38, could you try adding comma partial equals true?
Oh, that is a great call.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
it's a shot in the dark. It might fail, so don't give me too
Yeah.
much credit yet.
Fair, but I that wasn't even on my radar, and even if it fails, I feel like this
Yeah,
is
I would just take off line 3.
yeah.
There we go.
There we go. Great call, man. Yeah, Brandon, your approach works as well. I think this is the better approach for obvious reasons because we get to keep the task serializer. Just as a sanity check, let's do select star from list. Lists. And we see that the list indeed got created without issue. So I think this is the way to go. So folks, just to recap, we need partial equals true. Otherwise, the serializer will complain. If we create a list without any tasks. And we need to make a custom serializer create method, if that's correct, Francisco. Handle creating a list with tasks. So this is the best approach. And so now we've got lists working, right? We can view lists, we can create lists. I'm not going to worry too much about deleting lists, although that is one of the quicker endpoints to write. So we might as well just write put and delete. And then I think we'll have time to implement a little bit of code for tasks, and then we'll have to switch gears. We probably won't be able to get to subtasks. So for updating, let's actually write the delete endpoint first, because it is the simplest. And actually, for this stuff, we are now on a different route. right? Because updating a list or deleting a list is for an existing list and needs to happen on a different route because we actually want to identify the list ID in that URL path. So I'm just going to go ahead and create the class AList, which also will inherit token rec. I will come back to it in just a moment, but now I can inherit it here, and our path is going to be the list ID. And let's import our new API view. Yeah, and Francisco, thank you so much, man. That was a great call. I was totally going in the wrong direction on that one. And so now this is our route, right? API/lists/list ID for creating or for modifying or deleting a list. So let's handle deleting a list. It's always nice to write the simplest stuff first and get it working. We're going to need to grab the current list. And I apologize, we actually need to also pass the URL param list ID. And we might as well write the get list helper function. I was jumping around a bit. Let's write a helper for us, because we're going to want to use this in multiple places. So we're going to want to grab the list. And we can just pass this request.users.lists, and we can tell it find the list that has this ID. And let me go ahead and import this. See, is it from shortcuts? And indeed it is. And I probably want to use get object before report because I just want one object, one instance of my model. Let's fix that method name. So this is just a little wrapper, but it puts this in one place. It lets me abstract this code out. And if I need to change it, I just need to change it in the one spot. And honestly, now I can just do self current list equals self get list, right? Using our method here. And just call delete. And let's test this out real quick. If we go to our request, let's make a delete request for list ID of 1. And let's see, am I missing the trailing slash? Yeah. This looks like it should be right. I have an error right here in my path. I did not close that curly bracket. And that is a hard one because that's just a string. So I'm not going to get error completion. So also why it's nice to just always test as you go. And it looks like I have another typo here. I said users instead of user. That should be a pretty quick fix. Let's try our request again. And now we're cooking. And we've deleted a list. Let's go ahead and recreate it. And then we can add some tasks, and then we'll have to switch gears. So now we have the list again. Let's build out a couple tasks for this list. So I'm going to want to hop over to my tasks app. And let's close this list app out. Let's close this out. Let's go to the task app and open up the views here. And in fact, I'm just going to copy over from the list app. Again, I'm just going to copy all my imports, dump them here into the task app. Get rid of that. Do a quick scan to make sure I changed all the list specific stuff, like say that and that. And at this point, we're really off to the races. And we're going to make an all tasks class that's also going to inherit from token rec. And we're going to want to grab a task that belongs to a specific list. And we're going to want to be able to create a task. Or excuse me, we're going to want to grab all tasks that belong to a list. Or add a new task we create to a list. Right, and so here in the URLs py for the list app, let's import all tasks, and we'll want to do something like this. And let me double check my guide code to make sure that that's correct. Yeah, and in fact, I want to add a trailing slash there. And so now for a specific list, we get all of its tasks, or we can create a task. And so let's go ahead and build this out. In fact, it's going to look pretty similar to a lot of the list code we just wrote. And again, we're going to be passing the list ID. Again, the task serializer is going to do a lot of the work. And again, we can do request.user.lists.get the specific list that we want and get all of its tasks until the task serializer many is true. So again, this method chaining with this OOP Django model stuff, once you start to get used to it, is so powerful and flexible. And now we just need to return that as a response. And I just need to add the S and stats then. And let's quickly test this out. Let me go ahead, and this indeed is going to be a GET request. And we're going to get its tasks, and you can sort of start to see how the hierarchy aspect of REST APIs works in terms of resources and URL patterns. And let me set my authorization header, because we need to be logged in to do this. And we shouldn't have any tasks, but we should get this back. And let's see, list matching query does not exist. There should be a list with that exists. So I wonder. Let's just do another Thunder client request. Let's see what lists do exist. Maybe my auth token has expired, or I changed it without realizing. It's because we deleted the list of ID1, but Postgres doesn't like go back in terms of its IDs. That ID was already used as a primary key for a row. So when we created the list again, it moved forward to ID2. And this way, Postgres doesn't have to care about if stuff gets deleted or not. It just always auto increments that ID. So let's go ahead and change 1 to 2. And now we get back all of the tasks in our list, which is exactly what we want because right now there are no tasks. And that's what we're going to tackle next is the post endpoint to add a task to the list. And again, this code is going to be really similar to what we wrote just a couple minutes ago for the list. And we'll see if there's any wrinkles that we run into. And I will probably have to do the partial is true because of the subtasks. We want to grab the list that we're working with. Let's call this parent list. We want to, and I'm actually not sure. Do we need this? We don't need the parent list. We want to make sure the list ID is valid, right? We want to return a 404 if a list with that ID does not exist. Right? And in fact, Earl John, yes, sir.
I have a quick question on that. So like, isn't the ID automatically generated?
It is, but just like when I'm creating in my code, in my React code or in Thunder client, if I make a mistake and I use an ID that doesn't exist. Let's see. Well, right now it's erroring because I have half-written code. But just a moment ago, I sent an ID that doesn't exist, and we got this 500 internal server error. Right? The ID is auto-generated, but what if the client screws up? Like I did right here. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. Absolutely. And actually, we really should do this up here. And in fact, let's just do def get list self request list ID, just like we did with all tasks, to be honest. But I think this is actually going to be useful. And let's just, I'm going to do a little bit of copying and a little bit of code mangling. And I'm going to make sure that I have this right. This should not be many equals true because we're just returning one list. And I don't need all of this stuff. In fact, I'm kind of, so this is the danger of combining stuff. I think that looks right. Let me hop over to my list app. and that get list. And it's indeed the same. So, you know, if we wanted to, we could refactor it a bit more, but it's kind of a pain. I don't want to have to import the list API view just for that one method. It's actually a great example of something that might be a good class method, right? Which was an OOP question from way back when, because I don't want to have to instantiate the all lists API view to use this. But I'm not going to do that refactor now. So hopefully this should work, and this should return the thing to get the list that we want. Let's try parent list equals self get list, and we pass request and list ID. Because if we get this working here, I can then use it over here in the other code. I'm going to leave that there because I don't want to lose code that's good. So task serializer parent list many equals true, and we want the tasks on the parent list. So let's see if this works. No list matches the given query. That is the bad list ID. But note how before we got a 500 error, we didn't get a nice JSON response body. We got that big Django error message HTML page. We've just dramatically improved the error handling of our API for any React clients using it. And indeed, now this works. Right? And now I have confidence that I can use this get list helper method over here. And we should now be able to safely get the parent list. Now we can continue on with adding a task. I'm constructing the data object that we're going to use to create the new task. And partial. It's true. And we'll just throw in an else. And so now we follow the same pattern. We use the serializer to construct the model instance. We use partial true so it doesn't freak out if there are no subtasks. We use the serializer to check for validity, save the model instance, return the data if we create the task. Otherwise, we return an error. So let's try this out. If we take a quick look at our task app, we need name and we need completed. So over here, instead of a get, let's do a post. And in the body, I'm just using a simple name. Completed false. And we got a 500 internal error. I wonder if I need the trailing slash at the end. That solved the problem. Partial true gives us what we need. No subtasks, task A, not completed. A good follow-up feature would be adding like a created at date timestamp, or Django actually creates that with Django models and using it. And now if we get all our lists, we see that the list has some tasks. So that took us a bit over time, but I think was a really good review of the stuff that we want to see. So let's just take a minute or two, and I think we can do 1 or 2 questions, and then we should take a short break and do data structures. Does that sound good to folks? All right. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We didn't get to subtasks, but we now have a pattern that is easily extended to subtasks, right? At this point, I don't want to say that's trivial, but it's much more straightforward. What would people like to review or dig into with this view code or the code for tasks and lists? Brandon, yes, sir. Brandon, yo.
I just have a quick question. So how does it know to tie this created task to the parent list again?
Yeah, can you
that
point me to like a part of the code we can be looking at?
The post method, 40 to like probably where you get parent list and you don't use parent list.
Oh, right here on line 42.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I can we don't actually need to use parent list. And in fact, what I'll do is like the Django parlance is underscore is a variable name for something we don't care about. We just get the list to verify the ID is correct. And what was your question again?
And could you correct me if I'm wrong? It knows that this list is tied to the parent list based on the foreign key relation that we made in the model. And
Correct.
you set that to the list ID.
So the list. So this is really the only list. Parent list is maybe a little bit of a misnomer, but yes, the list and the user models are connected with that foreign key relationship in the list model. And let me do a quick split here. And let's pull up. It is list model. And if we look right here, we've got this foreign key relationship between the user model and the list model.
Okay, for some reason I thought you had to do something extra in order for it to tie together, but I guess Django just knows.
That's correct. So list and user get connected because of that. Request and user get connected because of the token. If that makes sense, right? Because the token identifies the user. That's how Django knows how to find the user. And this is all you need to do to create a relationship between two models, is use foreign key or one-to-one relationship or one-to-many.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Brandon N.
Yeah, so just to kind of reword it a little bit from my understanding,
Please.
what you're saying is that the token references the user and then all of the data within the user is then accessible by Django?
Yeah, I think a simpler way to think about it is Django gets the token in the request. It runs its little algorithm to figure out what user the token is connected to, because it has the token and the user ID stored in the database. And so it just grabs the user that token belongs to.
So if we were to, just reference the user table, we could see just like everything. So we would see all the lists, the subtasks.
Actually, no, but that's the beauty of the Django models and Django ORM is that in Postgres, I always forget these table names. So let's do select star from user app user. Right? There's a bunch of junk in here, but it's, email, display name, address, so on and so forth. The user table has nothing in it for lists and so on. But the list table has that foreign key column with the user ID. Right.
So in order
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
So in order to see all of that data, you would need to have like a join statement or
exactly. So
okay.
That's what all of this stuff does under the hood. And in fact, I should just write that right here. You like select star from, I don't know, lists, join on users where my, you know, list user ID equals, I don't know, user ID or something like that. I am butchering that join query, but
No, I get the gist.
yeah, exactly. And so that's the awesome thing about Django models and Django ORM. It does all this for us every time. And then we get to use this cool object-oriented way of interacting with our data. Earl John, yes, sir.
I have two questions. First is that like I just want to visualize what we are trying to do in here. Are we trying to have like the user logs in and then he can add list. It can be like there's one list, there's two lists, and in those lists there are tasks to add, right? Which is like his to do stuff in here, and then in the second list he could have another to do tasks in there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like,
And
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
my second one was just can I see the token rec real quick?
Yes.
In there.
Let me hop to it.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is absurdly simple.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Cody, yes, sir.
Yep, you actually already answered half my question, but the other half was, could you open up the task app task in the PSQL or in your Postgres?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a look at the task app task table. Right, ID, name, completed, and the all-important foreign key column pointing to a list. And now let's look at the data with the select query. And what's on your mind?
Nope, that's it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, so Postgres works the way we expect. Foreign keys, foreign key columns, IDs, Django models, ORM, object relationship mapping. Right, tables have relationships. We represent them as objects, and we connect it all together. All right, this was awesome. Honestly, I'm loving these questions. Unfortunately, as always, time is our friend and our enemy. So let's switch gears. But this was a great review session. Thank you all, and I hope this will be useful. And I think it will be, and I think you all are pretty well prepared. Let me go ahead and stop the recording.